You probably know that to build muscle, get stronger, or improve at any physical endeavor, you've got to train. But how much should you train exactly? This is an extremely important question because if you don't train enough, you simply won't be doing enough work to improve. But if you train too much, you'll be doing so much work that your body won't be able to recover, rendering both of these situations highly ineffective for long-term gains. To avoid these two extremes and progress as efficiently as possible, Dr. Mike Isertell and Dr. James Hoffman have come up with the volume landmarks that are discussed in depth in the book How Much Should I Train that I'll be summarizing in this video. But before we get into them, let's go over what the term training volume even means. In simple terms, training volume refers to the amount of training being done, which in strength and hypertrophy training is usually measured as the number of working sets. If you do 20 working sets of bicep curls per week, your total weekly volume for your biceps is 20 sets. Of course, if you factor in indirect bicep work such as pull-ups and rows, your training volume will be a bit higher, but you get the picture. For sets to be classified as a working set, it needs to meet three criteria: good technique, adequate relative effort, and adequate intensity. Good technique is the type of technique that maximizes the stimulus to fatigue ratio, full range of motion, a controlled eccentric, and a deep stretch under tension. Adequate relative effort is anything above RP7 or under RER3. For more information on this topic, check out my latest video on relative effort. And adequate intensity is enough load to drive your desired adaptations. For hypertrophy, it's 30 to 85% of your 1 rep max or sets of 5 to 30 reps, while for strength, it's 80 to 92.5% of your 1 rep max or sets of 3 to 6 reps. Only when a set meets all three of these criteria can you call it a working set and count it as such. Okay, so now that you know what training volume is and how it's measured, let's get into the volume landmarks. The four main volume landmarks are maintenance volume, minimum effective volume, maximum recoverable volume, and maximum adaptive volume. Maintenance volume is the lowest amount of volume you can do and still maintain your gains. Minimum effective volume is the lowest amount of volume you can do and still measurably improve. Maximum adaptive volume is the amount of volume that yields the best gains, and maximum recoverable volume is the highest amount of volume you can recover from. Now that you know the definition of each of these landmarks, let's talk about what each of them actually mean and how they can be used to effectively make progress. Let's go over maximum recoverable volume first, as that is the most important one to understand. You see, your body only has a finite ability to recover from training, so training as much as possible will not lead to the best results, as that assumes that your capacity to recover is infinite, which is simply not the case for any physiological system. This means that there is a top end of how much volume you can benefit from, and going above it is counterproductive. This top end is called maximum recoverable volume, also known as MRV, which is the most volume you can do in a given training timescale and still recover to present a full overload in the next. This training timescale can be anything: exercise, session, microcycle, mesocycle, or even macrocycle. But since the microcycle is the most commonly used training timescale unit, I'll be referring to MRV and its microcycle timescale from here on out. Okay, so MRV is the most amount of volume you can do in a given microcycle or week, while still being able to present an overload in the next. But what even is overload, and why do we need to present it? Overload is the second most important training principle, which states that for you to effectively make progress, your training has to be both within the maximal threshold of the system being trained and be higher in magnitude than the recent historical overloading. In other words, your training has to be hard and getting harder over time. To illustrate this, look at these four scenarios. In scenario 1, your training is easy and getting easier over time, which is the complete opposite of what you want. In scenario 2, your training is easy, but it's getting harder over time, which is also not something that you want, even though you're theoretically progressing. In scenario 3, your training is hard, but it's getting easier over time, which will stimulate some adaptations, but only in the first couple of microcycles. But in scenario 4, your training is hard and getting harder over time, which is exactly what you want. This means that for you to get stronger and build muscle as efficiently as possible, you must be recovered enough to present an overload. If you're not, you're literally getting worse for what you're training for, which most likely isn't the reason why you're training in the first place. Okay, but why is this MRV concept even important to understand? Firstly, most importantly, it allows you to know how much is too much. If you're not sufficiently recovered to present an overload, you're by definition over your MRV, and it can be almost certain that the amount of volume you were doing was too much. I said almost because chance events here and there can impede recovery in the short term, even with appropriate training volumes. But if you find yourself chronically under-recovered, you can be sure that you're doing too much volume. Secondly, it allows you to tailor a training program to an individual, since everyone's MRVs are different. You can't just give your training program to your friend and expect him to make progress exactly like you did. Maybe it's under or over his MRV, meaning that it might not work as well for him as it did for you. Of course, if your friend has the same goals as you, his training program is not going to look completely different. It's going to be more similar than different, but the only thing that almost certainly will be different is the amount of volume. And thirdly, it encourages you to take care of your recovery. This is because the better your nutrition and sleep is, the higher your MRV is, which means that you'll be able to benefit from more volume and make faster progress. This is where we can say that more is better, but only if you can recover. Okay, so now we know that doing too much work is a serious possibility due to the MRV landmark. But is it also possible to do too little work? You bet it is, which is where the MEV landmark answers the picture. MEV, or minimum effective volume, is the lowest amount of volume you can do and still measurably improve. Measurably is the key word here, since it's possible to improve, but at such low paces that it's basically unnoticeable. For example, if you went from 6 to 7 pull-ups over a year, technically you would should be over your MEV because you made some progress. But since that progress was so minuscule, you can't really say that your training was productive. For you to measurably improve, you must increase the magnitude of the measured variable. Do so in a timescale that makes the change relevant, and ensure that the change is larger than the error expected when measuring the variable in question. This means that adding 1 rep over the year is not a sign of measurable improvement. Sure, you increased the magnitude of the measured variable, but you didn't do it in a timescale that makes the change relevant. It took you a year, while for most people, it shouldn't take more than a couple of weeks. And lastly, you didn't ensure that the change is larger than the error expected when measuring the variable in question. Your performance can be altered by a few reps here and there by your mood, gym conditions, nutritional status, personal motivation status, and technical crispness. So in this case, we can say that you weren't above your MEV. The only scenario in which you could have been is if you were above your MRV, but that would be clear to you after a couple of weeks. Okay, that's it for the definition of MEV. Now let's talk about why it's even important to know this landmark. The first and most obvious reason is that it lets you create training programs that will not be below MEV and thus be useless. If your MEV is 10 sets, you're not going to run a program that consists of only 6 sets because you know that's simply not enough volume for you. The second reason is that it doesn't let you be too conservative with your training. Some people are really averse to doing high amounts of volume due to increased risk of injury, and while too little training will almost certainly decrease injury risk, at some point, this will be at the cost of making any meaningful progress. And the third reason is that it reveals to you the beginning of the golden training zone, or in other words, the beginning of the zone of training volume in which pretty much all gains are made. Training below MEV won't produce results, nor will constantly training above MRV. Training between them, however, is where all the benefit is. Now that you know what the MRV and MEV landmarks are, we can finally start talking about the maximum adaptive volume, or MAV, which is the amount of volume that in any one unit of time yields the greatest adaptive response. As we've concluded so far, training either below your MEV or above your MRV will not lead to any gains, which means that your MAV must be somewhere in between these two landmarks. But where exactly is it? That's where the first problem appears, as it's impossible to pinpoint your MAV to a certain amount of training volume due to its mobile nature. It can be located anywhere in the range from your MEV to your MRV, depending on how sensitive you are to training and how much fatigue you've accumulated. For example, at the beginning of a mesocycle, right after a deload, your body is so fresh and sensitive to training that training at your MEV will produce the best gains. But at the end of a mesocycle, right before deload, your body is so fatigued and desensitized to training that training at your MRV is the only way how you're going to make any progress. This means that your MAV increases from your MEV to your MRV as you progress through a mesocycle, due to the second condition of the overload principle, which says that training volume must be slowly going up for effective progress. If it's not, this is what'll happen. You'll start training at a stimulative volume, but by not increasing it, it'll get increasingly less stimulative due to your body adapting. Sure, it'll still be above the overload threshold for some time and allow you to make some gains, but since it's not increasing in magnitude, it's not going to stimulate the best gains that your body is capable of. This means that you should start training at MEV and increase your volume until doing so will take you over your MRV, which is when you should take a deload to resensitize your body to training and repeat this process all over again. Just to be clear, training volume is usually increased by either doing more reps, lifting more weight, or adding sets. Which one of these you choose depends on your goals. For example, if your goal is to get stronger, you should primarily aim to increase your training volume by lifting more weight, as that's what causes strength adaptations to take place. Reps should be increased only if adding weight isn't possible, while sets should be added only if you're not able to travel the whole MEV to MRV distance through weight additions alone. On the other hand, if your goal is to build muscle, you need to employ all three. You should do more reps or lift more weights to increase the per set volume, but you should also add sets to increase the per workout volume. This is because muscle is built through an increase in overall volume, while strength is built through an increase in the amount of weight you're lifting. Okay, but is moving through the whole MEV to MRV range really necessary? Here are 3 different scenarios in which you're not moving through the whole MEV to MRV range, and why they might not be the best approaches to training. The first is ending your mesocycle before you reach your MRV. The second is starting a mesocycle above your MEV, and the third is just staying in the middle. The first scenario may appeal to people who are very afraid of getting injured or overtraining by getting close to their MRV, and while it is a safe method of progressing, it's not a good long-term approach to training for the following reasons. The first is that you're simply leaving gains on the table. This might not seem like that big of a deal since being at the tail end of the curve, deloading and restarting doesn't appear to lead to much missed gain. However, this also means that you have to deload more often, which means that less of your time will be spent making progress and more recovering. Theoretically, the deload could be shorter since your cumulative fatigue isn't as high, but that's not really practical from a training program design viewpoint, as training is usually planned in weeks, and having a 5-day-long deload could mess with your training structure. And even if that's not a concern for you, training for shorter periods of time will simply not allow you to accumulate as much training momentum and thus reduce the quality of your training. The second is that for advanced athletes, highly disruptive training is likely a must for continued progress. If you've already built quite a lot of muscle and strength, your body just doesn't want to build more muscle and strength because these adaptations are metabolically expensive to sustain, so you have to work extra hard to continue creating them. This means that the peak of your adaptive curve will shift more to your MRV instead of being in the middle, so skipping out on MRV training is even less advisable if you've been training for multiple years. The third is that your MRV might not increase as quickly. As you train over long periods of time, your MRV goes up, which allows you to train with chronically more volume and obtain better gains. But if you never approach your MRV, how fast will it increase? It may very well still increase, but since you're violating the principle of specificity by not approaching your MRV in this context, it's unlikely to increase as quickly as if you approached it. And the fourth is that you miss out on the potential benefits of functional overreaching. Functional overreaching is the phenomena of the benefits of taking a system slightly beyond the short-term capacity to recover. For example, if your MRV is 20 sets, you could do 22 sets in the final week of your mesocycle because it's your last week before a well-deserved deload. This will result in a delayed supercompensation effect, in which your body will create more adaptations during the deload than it would if you trained under your MRV. Okay, so avoiding the top end of the MEV to MRV range can impede training momentum, preclude some of the most productive training, reduce MRV increases over time, and prevent the benefits of functional overreaching. But what about avoiding the bottom end? This scenario may appeal to people who love training hard and find MEV volumes quite boring, me included. But it also might not be the best approach to training for the following reasons. The first is that you don't get the benefit of an increased MRV by starting small. This is because when you start a mesocycle, your body is super sensitive to training, which means that your MRV is very low. As you train around your MEV, you not only stimulate adaptations, but also increase your MRV by accustoming your body to training while avoiding accumulation of very high fatigue. So for a while, your MEV to MRV window doesn't actually get smaller, and you essentially gift yourself a few more weeks of productive training. Of course, this process won't continue indefinitely, as your MRV can only increase so much, but starting at MEV still buys you more training time while also stimulating adaptations, which seems like a win-win to me. The second is that you miss out on the least fatiguing training for no apparent benefit. What this does is it shortens your mesocycle without giving you an option for a shorter deload, since your training was still highly fatiguing. Unlike in the previous example, you essentially worsen your accumulation to deload paradigm by training less and deloading more often for no real benefit, which is only going to cost you the easy adaptations near your MEV. And the third is that you miss out on the easiest gains of the safest variety. While these gains aren't huge, they're as fitness enhancing as they are fatiguing, so they're unlikely to impede the rest of the mesocycle in any way. They're also made with really low volumes, so the chances they can lead to overreaching, overtraining, or injury are very low, the lowest that overloading training can have. If it's your desire to eliminate this part of the training process, then you're really arguing for the elimination of the easiest gains of the safest variety. For this to be a worthy trade-off, gains obtained closer to MRV would have to be much bigger than those obtained just above MEV, but that's rarely the case. And the fourth is an elevated injury risk. Research has shown that one of the most common causes of injury is a crazy elevation in training volume, which is exactly what you're doing when you're skipping the training near your MEV. You're coming back from a deload in which you did a few submaximal sets to maintain your abilities, and you decided to do 10 plus hard sets the first week back. What do you think is going to happen? Crazy soreness and an elevated injury risk. That's what's going to happen. And even if injury doesn't occur, which it probably won't, the degree of muscle damage resulting from high volumes that we're not worked up to might be so high that more resources will be diverted to recovery and fewer towards adaptation, resulting in less net gains. Imagine training harder than you should to end up getting less gains? That must suck. Okay, so avoiding the bottom end of the MEV to MRV range is even worse than avoiding the top end because you don't get the benefit of an increased MRV, you miss out on the least fatiguing training and the easiest gains of the safest variety, and you elevate your injury risk, all for no apparent benefit. And on top of that, you're not able to salvage the lost gains by taking a shorter deload since your training was still highly fatiguing, which makes the scenario even worse. But what about staying in the middle? Surely that's the best option since the magnitude of gains is highest in the middle, right? Not exactly. The first problem with this approach is that you miss out on the training near both MEV and MRV, which I already explained in great detail in the previous two scenarios. The second problem is that by starting in the middle, you end up overshooting your MAV. As I mentioned before, the MAV landmark is mobile, so don't get the false impression that it's always right between your MEV and MRV. When you start a new program, your MAV is basically at your MEV due to your body's increased sensitivity to training and the novelty of movements. And the more different your current program is from your previous one, the lower your MAV will be when you start it. This is why I don't really like this exact graph, as it gives the impression that the only worthwhile training occurs in the middle, and the bottom and top ends can be discarded. If this was the case, the adaptation curve would look something like this, but in reality, it probably looks something like this. Your gains remain pretty constant throughout the whole MEV to MRV range, so working through every part of it is the best strategy. The third problem is that it's simply not optimal to stay at a given volume due to the principle of overload. As you train, your body adapts and gets better at resisting stimulus, so for further progression, more stimulus is needed. And what is the only way to increase the stimulus? Given that your technique, relative effort, and intensity are kept in check, doing more training volume, whether that be an increase in load, reps, or sets. This means that if you decide to just stay at a certain volume, you'll quickly plateau and stop making any progress because you're not sufficiently challenging your body. Of course, in this graph, it doesn't look like you're just staying at a certain volume. It looks like you're moving through about 1/3 of it, so you theoretically would make some gains, but you definitely wouldn't get the most you could out of your mesocycle. Okay, so now that you have a good understanding of the MAV landmark, let's go over why it's important to know this landmark, as I did with all the others. The importance of knowing your MAV is self-evident, By knowing how much training volume you need, you can make the best gains that your body is capable of. The only downside is that you need to figure out your MAV and MRV first, as these landmarks mark the start and end points of your MAV. Now that you know what the MRV, MAV, and MAV landmarks entail, we have to go over the last landmark, which might not be as popular as the others, but still very useful nonetheless. Maintenance volume, or MV. This is the lowest amount of volume you have to do to maintain your gains. You might be asking, but why would someone want to just maintain their gains? Aren't we trained to improve? Yes, we certainly are, but maintenance phases also have their phase and training program design. They can be employed to reduce fatigue, resensitize your body to training, peak for competition, or allow you to specialize for a specific ability or muscle group. During these periods, we want training volumes to be low, but we also don't want them so low that adaptations decline, so this is where maintenance volume enters the picture. The importance of MV is twofold. By knowing your MV, you not only won't end up underdoing volume and losing adaptations, but you also won't end up overdoing volume and getting a worse fatigue reduction effect. Remember, the goal of maintenance phases is to simply reduce fatigue while maintaining your gains, so doing more than is necessary will reduce the effectiveness of them. This is important to grasp because most people overestimate their MVs. They think it's 10 sets, while in reality it's more like 4. These are just some random numbers off the top of my head, but this is really about how much most people overestimate their MVs. Yes, you'll need to work your ass off to achieve certain adaptation, but once you have it, you just need to do a couple of sets per week to maintain it, because maintaining adaptations is much easier than acquiring them. Now that you know the definition of each of these landmarks, you might be asking the following question: how do I actually find them out for myself? To answer this question, let's go over how you can find each of these landmarks out for yourself to ground all of these concepts into reality. First, I'll tell you the formal way of finding your volume landmarks that's explained in the book, but if that sounds like too much work for you, I'll go over the quick way of finding your volume landmarks that may not be as precise, but still a very good estimate if you're not willing to wait months. The first landmark that we'll cover is the MRV landmark. As we discussed, your MRV is the most volume you can recover from, usually defined as recovery from one microcycle to the next, and recovery is defined as a return to your usual performance abilities. In short, you're recovered if you're performing comparably in this microcycle to how you did in your previous microcycle. This means that if you're unable to repeat your performance from the previous microcycle, you've hit MRV. To illustrate this, here's an example of how this would look like for strength training. If you wanted to get a stronger weighted pull-up, you'd first have to determine your accumulation to deload paradigm. Since strength training usually employs 3-to-1, 4-to-1, and 5-to-1 accumulation to deload paradigms, let's say you chose 4-to-1, 4 weeks of training and 1 week of deloading. This is really important to do, since your volume landmarks depend entirely on your accumulation to deload paradigm. The longer your accumulation phase, the lower your MRV is due to cumulative fatigue, but since you're essentially training for more weeks throughout the year, both of them cancel each other out. Okay, now that we have the length of our mesocycle pre-planned, we have to give each week an RP target to hit. If you don't know, RPE means rating of perceived exertion, which measures how difficult a set was from 1 to 10, and since 7 is where strength adaptation starts to take place, we have to start there. Our goal with RPE is to slowly increase it from 7 to 10 throughout the accumulation phase, and since our accumulation phase is 4 weeks long, it's very simple to do. First week is RP7, second week is RP8, third week is RP9, and fourth week is RP10. Now that we have our accumulation to deload paradigm and RP targets figured out, we basically have everything we need to run a strength mesocycle. The only thing that's left is volume, but since you're clueless about your volume landmarks, you just have to guess. Let's start with 3 sets per session or 9 sets per week, given that you have a training frequency of 3 times per week. In the first week, you end up doing 9 sets of 5 with 20 pounds at RP7. In the second week, you end up doing 9 sets of 5 with 25 pounds at RP8. In the third week, you end up doing 9 sets of 5 with 30 pounds at RP9. And in the fourth week, you end up doing 9 sets of 5 with 35 pounds at RP10. After the final week, you have to determine if you hit your MRV by asking yourself if you could repeat or even improve your last week's performance. If you could, you're by definition under MRV and could have benefited from more volume. If you couldn't, you're by definition at or over your MRV and did the right amount of volume. Of course, if it's your first time doing this, you may not know if you could have or couldn't have progressed further, so your best bet is simply give it a try. Try repeating your 4th week's performance in week 5 and see how you end up doing. If you end up matching or even beating your performance, you were under your MRV, but if you can't match your last week's performance, you hit your MRV just on time. If you undershot your MRV, try to increase the average weekly volume by a little bit in each mesocycle, let's say by 1 to 2 sets, and see how you end up doing. Eventually, you'll find the right amount of volume for your preferred accumulation to deload paradigm and be able to hit MRV and RP10 at the same time, which is the main goal of any strength mesocycle. This is because hitting MRV means that you squeezed every last drop of adaptations out of this mesocycle, while hitting RP10 or failure means that you maximize load progression. However, it's also possible to hit your MRV too early, in week 3 let's say, and not even get to the end of your mesocycle because your performance just sucks and your fatigue is way too high. In this case, you did too much volume and should decrease it in the next mesocycle. However, for hypertrophy training, MRV detection is a bit different, although it still follows the same principles. Firstly, you want to determine your accumulation to deload paradigm paradigm and your RP targets for each week. Since hypertrophy training isn't as fatigue sensitive, you can do it for longer stretches of time. 5-to-1, 6-to-1, and 7-to-1 are the most common accumulation to deload paradigms. So let's say you chose 6-to-1. This means that first week is RP7, second and third weeks are RP8, fourth and fifth weeks are RP9, and sixth week is RP10. The only difference from strength training is that hypertrophy training thrives on set additions. If you suspect that you could recover from more volume, you should increase it. This will come at the cost of lower repetitions, making your intra-set progress slower than it otherwise would be. But since adding a set massively increases the training stimulus, your muscles will grow much more. Of course, you shouldn't do so much volume that you hit MRV early and are unable to continue training productively, but you should prioritize increasing volume above anything else. To illustrate this, let's continue with the weighted pull-up example, only this time in the context of hypertrophy training. In the first week, you end up doing 9 sets of 8 with 10 pounds at RP7. In the second week, you end up doing 10 sets of 9 with 10 pounds at RP8. In the third week, you end up doing 11 sets of 9 with 10 pounds at RP8. In the fourth week, you end up doing 12 sets of 9 with 12.5 pounds at RP9. In the fifth week, you end up doing 13 sets of 9 with 12.5 pounds at RP9. And in the sixth week, you end up doing 14 sets of 10 with 12.5 pounds at RP10. Of course, your sets aren't going to be completely equal as they are in this example, but this is just for simplicity's sake. Just like with strength training, you have to figure out if you fit your MRV. If you could repeat your last week's performance, you haven't. But if you couldn't, you have. As you can see in this example, the only real difference from strength training is that while strength training prioritizes load increase while keeping reps and sets stable, hypertrophy training finally balances all three of them. Of course, you can get great results from just combining two of them or even by just choosing one, but for effective long-term progress, all three should be utilized. Okay, so this was how you can find your MRV for your accumulation to deload paradigm, by noting when your performance starts to drop off. But how can you find your MEV? The detection of this landmark is a bit less integrated into the training process, so you will have to go out of your way to look for it. In essence, the detection of MEV entails running a mesocycle with a low weekly volume without increasing it and seeing if you improved. If you did, you were at or over your MEV, but if you didn't, you were under your MEV. The first time you do this, you will probably be over your MEV, since most people overestimate where their MEV is. If you are, just repeat this mesocycle with 2/3 of the volume you chose previously. If you previously chose 9 sets, now choose 6 sets, and see if you still improved. Once you finally find out that you didn't improve, you can stop searching for your MEV because you found it. It's between this and the previous volume. If 9 sets was over your MEV but 6 sets was under it, your MEV is around 7 to 8 sets. This search should primarily be employed during specialization phases for muscle groups that you're not focusing on, as you probably don't want to spend your time making very little progress just to find your MEV. And lastly, let's go over how you can find your MV. We skipped MAV because it's the range between your MEV and MRV, and by knowing both of these values, you know your MAV. Before you start your search, know that finding your MV takes a bit longer than finding your MEV and MRV, because the only time you can test it is during an intentionally low volume maintenance phase. But on the bright side, it's very easy to tell if you're below MV, because losing ability is quite straightforward to measure. Knowing your MEV will speed up this process, as you know how much volume not to exceed, so it's recommended to find it first. Another caveat with finding your MV is that since underestimating will lead to a loss of gains, you don't want to start the estimate low and move up, but rather start the estimate high and move down. This means that you should start your search just under your MEV. If your MEV is 9 sets, you can start it at 7 sets. If your performance didn't decline after the low volume phase, you can repeat the search in the next low volume phase with an even lower volume, let's say 5 sets. Once you find a volume with which your performance declines, you find a volume that's under your MV. This means that your MV is somewhere between this and the previous volume. If your performance didn't decline with 7 sets but did with 5 sets, your MV is likely to be 6 sets. If all of this sounds super complicated, don't worry. Here I'll explain how you can get a good guess of your volume landmarks without having to wait months. To do this, we'll use the following indicators: the pump, perceived exertion, soreness, and performance. All of these are very partial indicators that don't tell us a whole lot, but by combining them together, we can get a really good guess of how much volume we need. The pump is the first indicator because cell swelling causes hypertrophy by itself and is very likely indicative of disruption. In other words, the bigger your pump is, the more you have stimulated your muscles. This works really well for sets above 10 reps, but since sets below 10 reps are known for not giving you huge pumps, we'll use the remaining indicators for them. Perceived exertion is the second indicator because how hard you feel you worked is a pretty good reflection of how much volume you did. If your workout felt easy, you probably didn't do a lot of volume, but if you were barely able to pick yourself up from the floor, you probably did something. Soreness is the third indicator because it can show how much you damage your muscles. This can range all the way from mild stiffness that lasts for a few hours up to DOMS that last for a week. In short, the more soreness you experience, the more volume you probably did. And performance is the fourth indicator because it shows if you're able to recover from the amount of volume you're doing. If your performance starts to decline or requires an excessive jump in RPE for it to match your previous performance, you're not recovered and are above your MRV. Keep in mind that these indicators aren't perfect. They're simply your best guesses at estimating how much volume you're doing. How so? Imagine a scenario where you didn't get a pump at all. The workout felt extremely easy. You didn't get sore at all, and your performance was recovered right after the workout. Was this workout really that stimulative? Not really. Now imagine a scenario where you got a psychotic pump, expending yourself ourselves to your fullest, we're sore for a week, and we're ready to repeat this performance only after 2. Was this workout stimulative? Definitely. Of course, you shouldn't be training at neither one of these extremes. I just wanted you to imagine these two scenarios so you can see the value of these indicators. Okay, but how can we use them to estimate our volume landmarks? Imagine the first scenario again. No pump, easiest workout in the world, no soreness, and no drop in performance. Since we know that to stimulate adaptations, we need to challenge our bodies, we can say that this type of training most likely isn't very stimulative, so it's probably around your MV or maintenance volume. Now imagine a different scenario. You got a decent pump, expended some energy, felt weakness or slight soreness in your target muscles after the workout, and were still easily able to recover for your next workout. This most likely resembles the MEV landmark, as in your training is stimulative, but it's nothing too crazy. And lastly, the MRV landmark. How would this one look? Actually, the only indicator you have to pay attention to is your performance. If you're able to repeat or improve your previous performance, you're by definition under MRV, but if you're not able to do so, you're over it. This makes finding MRV extremely simple. Once your performance stalls or declines, you've reached it. Now that you know how to quickly estimate your landmarks, let's go over how you can use these estimates in practice. Firstly, you should start your mesocycle at MEV, which means that your first sessions should feel like workouts, but they also shouldn't be too hard. You can use the pump and perceived exertion indicators to determine how much volume you should be doing in the first workout. Once you have a decent pump and or the session felt slightly challenging, end the workout. After the workout, you can use the soreness and performance indicators to enhance your assessment. If you got slightly sore and were able to recover for your next workout, you did the right amount of volume. Then slowly increase your volume and or relative effort week by week until you reach a point where you're not able to improve your performance, as that's where your MRV lies. This quick way of finding your volume landmarks is much better for beginners because it doesn't require you to pre-plan the length of your mesocycle and let you run into your MRV whenever. But if you're more advanced, you may need to be more precise in your estimates and use the formal way. Now that you know the definitions of each of these landmarks and how to find them out for yourself, let's go over what actually caused them to be where they're at. This is important to discuss, as almost everyone will have different volume landmarks, and knowing what causes them to be different can help you program better programs for different athletes. Not only that, your own volume landmarks can change due to various factors, so knowing how much volume you need under certain circumstances can help you program better programs for yourself. The first category of differences are genetic differences, of which the first are general genetic adaptation and recovery factors. Some people are simply more sensitive to training, so their MV and MEV is lower, while some people are genetically predisposed to recover better, so their MRV is higher. The second genetic difference is muscle fiber type. While faster twitch fibers tend to grow more than slower twitch ones, they take on more damage, so their volume landmarks are lower. This means that if you're faster twitch dominant, you can train less and grow more than your slower twitch friends. Ain't that a trip? The third genetic difference is muscle architecture. The architecture of the attachment of muscle fibers to the tendons plays a role in force production potential, and the more force a muscle can produce, the more damage it incurs and the lower its volume landmarks are. For example, your quads are positioned in such a way that they can produce a lot more force than your biceps can, which is why you almost never see bodybuilders doing the same amount of work for their quads and biceps. Other architectural aspects of muscles dictate how susceptible they are to stretch under load, such as the points of attachment and insertion for that muscle with relation to adjacent bones and joints. Stretch under load is extremely fatiguing, so the more stretch under load a muscle is physically capable of undergoing, the more fatigue the muscle can accumulate and the lower its volume landmarks are. A clear example of this is the lateral deltoid. One of the reasons you can do countless sets of lateral raises and almost never get sore is that it's virtually impossible to expose them to a deep stretch. The hamstrings, on the other hand, are ideally positioned for extensive loaded stretching, and as a result, withstand so much damage during hip hinge moves like stiff-legged deadlifts that they expectedly have significantly lower volume landmarks than the lateral delts. The main thing we can conclude from this point is that not all muscles should be trained equally, even if they belong to the same individual. The fourth genetic difference is limb ratios and lengths. This one is really simple. If an athlete is 6'5" with long legs, this person's squat can cover twice the total distance of someone who is 5'1" and has short legs. This means that the shorter athlete might be able to recover from 20 sets of squats per week, while the taller athlete might struggle to recover from 12. All else being equal, while they may be doing different amounts of volume, given their divergent physiology, these two athletes are actually doing the same amount of work. And the last genetic difference is sex. Females are more likely to have smaller muscles that produce less force, have shorter limbs than most males, and just don't take on as much homeostatic damage from training, which gives them higher volume landmarks. That's it for the genetic differences. Now let's talk about lifestyle differences, of which the first is previously established work capacity. Work capacity is the ability to resist the effects of fatigue and maintain performance during exercise, which means that someone with a high work capacity can perform more volume than someone with a lower work capacity. Okay, but what determines how high someone's work capacity is? One half of it is genetics, while the other half is the level and type of activity one was accustomed accustomed to before beginning current training. For example, if you used to be a powerlifter, your work capacity and MRV are going to be quite low, since your body is used to training at really low volumes. On the other hand, if you used to be an endurance athlete, your work capacity and MRV are going to be quite high, since your body is used to training at really high volumes. This means that you can't always assume that beginners will have low MRVs and work capacities. Many no doubt will, but there will be outliers, like those with a background in endurance sports. However, there's a caveat. Many of the same molecular mechanisms that increase your work capacity and fatigue resistance also limit your growth potential, like increase in AMPK pathways and related endurance adaptations. This means that an extremely high work capacity and recovery ability might limit your growth potential, which is not something that you probably want. However, developing some degree of underlying work capacity is critical to meeting your recovery ability and thus setting your MRV as high as it can be. You don't want to be in a position where your recovery ability is higher than your work capacity, as your inability to perform a certain amount of volume that you could recover from will slow down your progress. The second lifestyle difference is recovery modality application. Just because your work capacity allows you to do a ton of volume doesn't mean that you can recover from said volume. To illustrate this, imagine that your MRV is an empty glass. The higher MRV, the bigger the glass. Your work capacity, on the other hand, is the amount of beer you have at home. If you have a really small glass but you have a gallon of beer, it doesn't really matter that you have a gallon because the glass can only hold so much. You can try to pour the gallon in the glass, but most of it will just spill out and create a huge mess. In this case, increasing your recovery ability by getting a bigger glass will allow you to benefit from more total volume. And how to increase your recovery ability? You make sure to do the best you can with nutrition, sleep, and relaxation. By eating at maintenance or in a surplus with enough carbs, protein, and micronutrients, you help maximize your recovery abilities. And by getting enough sleep and avoiding high prolonged stress, you give your recovery mechanisms their best chance and longest durations to work. On the other hand, if you have a huge glass with barely any beer, it doesn't matter that your glass is huge because you don't have any beer. In this case, increasing your work capacity by buying more beer will allow you to do more total volume. And how to increase your work capacity? Mostly by continuing to push training volume, but also by losing some body fat. Another thing that can influence how much training volume you can benefit from is life stressors. Relationships, work, school, all of these things cause psychological stress, which can decrease the amount of training volume you can recover from. Think of these stressors as water in our glass of beer. If beer is the productive training that makes you bigger and stronger, then physical and mental stressors that add fatigue without stimulating benefit are what waters it down. This means that it's possible to fill up your glass with mostly water and just a splash of beer. In this case, you'll have reached your MRV without stimulating almost any hypertrophy or strength adaptations, which is a bad deal if that's what you were aiming for. The trick to a high and usable MRV is to have the biggest glass, the most beer possible on hand, and as little water as possible to dilute the mix. In other words, to optimize your gains, you want the best nutrition, sleep, and relaxation, the highest work capacity that doesn't impede your growth machinery, and as few life stressors as possible. This will allow you to have the lowest MV and MEV and have the highest MRV that your body is capable of. The third lifestyle difference is non-specific physical activities. The ideal environment for muscle growth and strength adaptations would be one in which your muscles were not called upon to do anything outside of leisurely activities and training, allowing you to save them for hard training. In this case, you'd be able to essentially fill the entire MRV glass with beer. However, most people can't devote their entire life to working out, so some part of their MRV glass is filled with non-specific physical activities that detract from how much training volume they're able to benefit from. This means that the less active you are on a day-to-day basis, the less work you need to do to improve, and the more work you can recover from. But don't get me wrong, this doesn't mean that you have to become a couch potato to maximize your gains. You should still be relatively active to stay healthy and lean, but think twice before applying to a construction job. That's it for the lifestyle differences. Now let's talk about training program differences. The first being exercise type. In general, barbell or bodyweight exercise seem to tax the physiology the most, dumbbells second, and machines the least. This is because the instability of dumbbells can reduce your force production potential, or in other words, the need to stabilize the dumbbells during pushing exercises can limit how many reps you can do or how much weight you can lift, while machines limit eccentric load exposure, and since eccentric contractions do the most damage to muscles, machines tax recovery the least. In short, exercises that allow you to lift a lot of weight, take the muscle through a full range of motion, get a deep stretch under tension, and milk everything you can out of the eccentric are more stimulative, and thus come with lower volume requirements than exercises that don't allow you to do those things. The second training program difference is program novelty. Anytime you change anything from one mesocycle to the next, the novelty will challenge your body in ways it's not as used to, which may initially lower your volume landmarks. This includes switching exercises, rep ranges, or cadence styles. The more of these you change at the same time, the more your volume landmarks will drop. This means that anytime you start a new program, do fewer sets than you think you should. Doing too much is much more problematic than not doing enough. The third training program difference is absolute intensity, which simply refers to how much weight you're using. The more weight you use, the more fatigue you generate and the smaller your volume landmarks get. A set of 3 is simply not equal to a set of 15. The fourth training program difference is proximity to failure or relative effort, which is a measure of how close you get to failure in a set. The closer you get to failure, the more fatigue you generate and the smaller your volume landmarks get. This is why constantly training to failure might not be the best training method, because it generates so much fatigue relative to stimulus that the trade-off is simply not worth it. A better alternative would be to start your mesocycle at around 3 reps in reserve and slowly decrease them until you hit failure at the end of the mesocycle. The next group of volume landmark differences are training career differences. There are 6 categories you can be in based on how long you've been training for: novice, beginner, intermediate, advanced, highly advanced, and master. Novices have done less than 6 months of dedicated training. Beginners have done between 6 months and 3 years of dedicated training. Intermediates have done 4 to 7 years of dedicated training. Advanced have done 8 to 14 years of dedicated training. Highly advanced have done 15 years plus of dedicated training. And masters have done more than 8 years of dedicated training and are over the age of 40. Keep in mind that these values are rough averages and are not set in stone. They're only meant to help you understand how your volume landmarks may change as you train for years and years, so don't get too caught up on the categories. Since there's quite a lot to talk about, let's cover each landmark separately, starting with MRV. Novices are so unused to training that even the tiniest bit beats them up, so their MRV is the lowest it'll ever be. But as novice turns into a beginner, their MRV starts rising due to increases in work capacity and recovery ability. This rise continues all the way to the advanced level, after which it actually starts to decline. This is because at the highly advanced level, intensity's use can become so great that your body is simply not able to recover from as much volume as before. A 600-pound squatter is simply not going to be able to do as many sets as a 300-pound squatter due to the exponentially disruptive effect of the sheer amount of load being used. This MRV decline continues into the master's category due to the aging process, which reduces both work capacity and recovery ability. Now that we've found the MRV for each of these categories, let's talk about MEV. The MEV for a novice is 1. Yes, you heard that right. Just 1 working set per week is enough for a novice to make gains. This is because their bodies are so unaccustomed to training that even the smallest bit of stimulus will create adaptations. This is what's called newbie gains. But as novices continue to train, the principle of overload ensures that their MEVs continue to rise and never stop. This means that as your MRV stops rising, your MEV window starts shrinking, and when your MEV eventually passes your MRV, net gains are no longer possible and maintenance becomes the recourse. Next up is the MEV landmark. Since MEV is a range and MEV and MRV marks the start and end points of it, we've already found out where it is for each of these categories. The only thing left noting is that the MEV window isn't the only thing that shrinks. The height of the adaptive curve shrinks as well, so the amount of gains you can expect at any point of the MEV window becomes increasingly smaller. And the last landmark left to discuss is the MV landmark. The MV for novices is 0 because they have nothing to maintain, but as they continue training, their MV slightly rises. But this rise is much slower than the rise of their MEV, so the longer they train, the relatively less they need to train to maintain their abilities. But as an athlete reaches the master's category, their MV can exceed their MRV, making even maintenance of gains impossible at any training volume, so conservation of gains to their highest degree becomes the recourse. Now that you know how your volume landmarks will change over your training career, let's talk about the implications this has on your training. The first implication is MEV biasing for novices and intermediates. MEV biasing simply means that more of your training is closer to your MEV rather than your MRV. This is for 2 reasons. Their technique development isn't yet complete and their motivation levels aren't as high. Their technique will tend to break down at high volumes in fatigue states, or close to MRV, and as a result, they may be inadvertently learning bad, broken technique, and therefore risking injury. In fact, because technique is very hard to change once established, it's a very good idea to learn it right the first time. And on top of that, due to their lower levels of motivation, the risk of psychological burnout is much higher when training at MRV, so the small bit of extra gains that we'll make by reaching MRV is simply not worth the risk of injury, poor technique acquisition, and psychological burnout. In short, novices and beginners have such an easy time making progress at low training volumes that the downsides of going to MRV outweigh the upsides, and biasing more of their training to MEV becomes a better alternative. The second implication is the growing MV to MEV gap. For a novice, the MV and MEV are essentially almost the same value. If 4 sets per week will make you stronger, 3 sets per week might only maintain your strength. But as novices become beginners and beginners become intermediates, their MEVs leave their MVs behind. This means that the MEV of an intermediate might be 12 sets, while their MV might be 8 sets. Okay, but this begs the question, what the hell does the adaptation curve look like between those 2 points? To be very technical, anything just over MV can be considered adaptive. But for intermediates and beyond, the slope of that adaptation curve is tiny. So tiny, in fact, that training between the 2 points for months and months may reveal practically no detectable improvements whatsoever. As such, there's basically no difference between doing 8 and 11 sets because both of these volumes will just end up maintaining your gains. This means that when you're doing low low volume phases to reduce fatigue, you should train exactly at your MV to get the best fatigue reduction effect. Training a bit over it will simply cause more fatigue for no benefit, rendering your low volume phase highly ineffective. In short, don't train in the no man's land of the MV to MEV gap. Either train at your MV to get the best fatigue reduction effect or train above your MEV to make the best gains. The difference between these two values will be really small at first, but as you become more advanced, the gap will widen, making it that much more important to avoid it. The third implication is the narrowing of the MEV window. As an athlete becomes more advanced, their MEV window narrows due to their MEV rising faster than their MRV, which makes progression difficult, fatigue accumulation consistently problematic, and most of your training near MRV. To continue creating adaptations under such conditions, here's a few strategies you can use. The first is to simply lower the amount of sets you add on a week-to-week basis. In hypertrophy training, beginners and intermediates are usually advised to add 1 to 2 sets per week, while also increasing how many reps they do or how much load they lift because their MEV window is so large. But for advanced athletes, such a huge jump in volume is no longer possible because their MEV window has become smaller. This means that they can only add 1 set every other week, otherwise they will simply hit MRV prematurely. The second strategy is to employ specialization phases. Specialization phases are phases in which you put most of your focus on one or multiple abilities or muscle groups, while putting all others on maintenance, and they're very useful if your summated body part MRV exceeds your systemic MRV, which is the case for most advanced athletes. To give you a quick example, imagine that your body as a whole has an MRV of 100 sets, but each of the 8 muscle groups you're training has an MRV of 20 sets. This means that if you try to train each muscle group at its MRV, your body as a whole will not be able to recover because your systemic MRV has been exceeded by 60 sets. But if you try to train each muscle group equally while also accounting for your systemic MRV, each muscle group will not even get close to reaching its MRV. The only real path forward in this scenario is simply focus on 3 to 4 muscle groups while putting all others on maintenance, which is exactly what a specialization phase is. This way, the 3 to 4 muscle groups you're focusing on will get the attention they deserve, while the others will be maintained, and when the next mesocycle rolls around, you can rotate the muscle groups you're focusing on so that each muscle group in your body gets trained equally. The third strategy is to induce more frequent exercise variation. Beginning a novel movement pattern can lower MEV, which can give you more overload opportunities. Of course, for anyone up to intermediate level, very frequent variation can be problematic, as it violates the sub-principle of directed adaptation and hinders overload progression with overly frequent shifts in exercise selection. But for advanced athletes, progressions are so short that this isn't much of a trade-off, and the lower temporary MEVs of new movements may offer net benefits. Keep in mind that this strategy is more relevant to physique athletes than anyone else. If you wish to get stronger in a specific movement pattern, it's best to stay away from frequent exercise variation. And the fourth strategy is to put a high degree of emphasis on recovery modalities. The better your nutrition, sleep, and relaxation is, the bigger your MEV window is. So if you're advanced, nailing your recovery modalities should be one of your top priorities. And the fourth and last implication is the volume conundrums of the master's athlete, or anyone in the advanced category and over the age of 40. The first thing that you'll experience as a master's athlete is your MRV descending below historical MAV. This means that your former best gain rates will cease being possible, but net gains can continue to be within reach. The second thing that you'll experience is your MRV and MEV crossing paths. This marks the end of positive adaptation curves. It means that only retention of already gained ability is possible. And the third thing that you'll experience is your MRV and MV crossing paths. At this point, maintenance is no longer possible, and losses in net ability are the result. Seems sad, but that's the reality. We will all age and not stay our best athletic selves forever. But intelligently constructed training and diligent approach of the recovery modalities can very much slow this decline, which may mean the difference between spending your later years in a nursing home and living them out completely independently. That's it for the training career differences. Now for the last group of training volume differences, which are diet differences. As far as we're concerned, there are 2 types of diets, hypocaloric and hypercaloric. During a hypocaloric diet, you're in a calorie deficit to lose fat, while during a hypercaloric diet, you're in a calorie surplus to build muscle. In between them, there is also an isocaloric diet, during which you just maintain your weight. But since your volume landmarks will be a default there, we don't need to talk about it. Both of these conditions can drastically change your volume landmarks, so let's go over them now, starting with MRV. During hypocaloric dieting, food consumption is insufficient to meet all of the body's needs, which is why the body will burn body fat to fill the void. This is good from a fat loss perspective, but since your body literally thinks that you're dying, it can no longer spare as much resources towards recovery, and thus your MRV declines. The extent of the MRV reduction is in direct proportion to the size of the caloric deficit imposed by the diet, which means that small deficits will lead to small reductions of MRV, while large deficits will lead to large ones. On the other hand, hypercaloric dieting raises the amount of resources that can be allocated towards recovery, so your MRV rises. It also increases your energy levels, especially if you're eating a lot of carbs, which can boost your work capacity, increase your MRV even further. However, unlike with hypocaloric dieting, the extent of the MRV increase is not in direct proportion to the size of the caloric surplus imposed by the diet. Once you increase your calories by about 20% above your maintenance, the small increase in MRV is not worth a huge amount of fat gain you will accumulate. So if your maintenance is 3,000 calories, don't go above 3,600 calories. This also applies to all the other volume landmarks, so keep it in mind. Next Next up is MEV. Since MEV is the balance between anabolic and catabolic processes, which just barely favor the anabolic, your MEV will rise on a hypocaloric diet due to a more catabolic environment. On the other hand, since a hypercaloric diet increases the anabolic response and decreases the catabolic response to any given volume of training, you can expect your MEV to fall on a hypercaloric diet. Next up is MAV. During a hypocaloric diet, your MEV window is smaller due to an increased MEV and decreased MRV, and on top of that, the height of the adaptive curve is smaller as well, making hypocaloric dieting not a great phase for making gains. On the other hand, during a hypercaloric diet, it's the exact opposite. Your MEV window is larger due to decreased MEV and increased MRV, and the height of the adaptive curve is larger, making hypercaloric dieting the best phase for making gains. And lastly, MV. Just like with MEV, during a hypocaloric diet your MV rises, but during a hypercaloric diet, it falls. Now let's talk about some implications that hypocaloric dieting has on your training. The first is that you have to start your mesocycles at higher volumes than usual to account for elevated MEVs. The only exception to this rule is when a diet is so restrictive or an athlete so advanced that the interval between MEV and MRV is small enough that normally rising fatigue during a mesocycle cuts the length of it too much. If this is the case, you can start the first microcycle at even lower volumes, so long as they're still above your MV. This means that super advanced athletes will make almost no gains during hypocaloric diets, which is to be expected due to a really catabolic environment. The second implication is that you have to end your mesocycles at lower volumes than usual to account for lowered MRVs. This means that if you usually progress from 12 to 20 sets, during hypercaloric dieting, you'll be able to progress only from 14 to 18 sets. In addition, due to an insufficient amount of recovery resources, it might be a good idea to avoid functional overreaching or surpassing your MRV. The third implication is that you have to make smaller jumps in volume to account for reduced MAV and conserve your accumulation to deload paradigm. If you used to add 2 sets every week to go from 12 to 20 sets, during hypocaloric dieting, you may only be able to add 1 set every week to go from 14 to 18 sets. Sure, you could continue adding 2 sets every week, but since you'll only be able to train for 3 weeks instead of 5, your accumulation to deload paradigm will become worse, which will only reduce the small amount of gains you will make. This also applies to rep and load increases, as they contribute to volume increases as well. To illustrate this, look at this picture, which illustrates how running a normal progression during a hypocaloric phase would look like. Starting and ending at your usual training volumes will both undershoot your MEV and overshoot your MRV, so you have to adjust for them by starting higher, making smaller jumps, and ending lower. The fourth implication is that if you're advanced, specialization phases during hypocaloric dieting become pointless. This is because if you take some abilities or muscle groups from MEV to MRV, you might sap so much of your already limited recovery resources that all others will have to be put below MV, which is just not a good trade-off. Since net adaptation during hypercaloric dieting is itself a questionable process for advanced athletes, specializing is simply not worth it. Hypocaloric diets should likely be times of all-around training, designed to conserve gains, or at most, make minimal ones. The fifth implication is that if you're very advanced, it's likely that your MEV will exceed your MRV, so during hypercaloric dieting, your goal should be to just maintain your gains. Sure, beginners and intermediates can still make gains during hypocaloric diets because their MV isn't as high, but as you become more advanced, your MEV rises, and on top of that, the hypocaloric diet increases your MEV even further, which can take it above your MRV and make further gains impossible. In really extreme cases, even your MV can exceed your MRV during hypocaloric dieting, but that's likely to happen only if you're prepping for a bodybuilding show. The sixth implication is that if you find your MV exceeding your MRV at any point in the mesocycle, it's likely that your calorie deficit is too large. In any of the mesocycles you run during the diet, your MV must start far enough away from your MRV so that the fatigue accumulated with maintenance training can be low enough to avoid pushing you over your MRV. This means that you must be able to run at least a minimal progression in volume and intensity through your dieting phase. If you're not able to do that and you find yourself reaching MRV sooner than you planned, it's highly likely that your calorie deficit is too large. In short, knowing your volume landmarks can help you figure out how hard you should push the pace of the diet. And the seventh implication is that the application of recovery modalities becomes that much more important during hypercaloric diets. Sure, during isocaloric and hypercaloric diets it is important, but given the catabolic nature of hypercaloric dieting, you need to do everything you can to increase your body's anabolic response, which is mostly accomplished through taking care of your recovery. This means that you need to get enough sleep and relaxation to make up for the loss of calories, at least to some extent. Cutting fats to minimal levels and keeping your carbs high also can help aid your recovery, so make sure not to cut carbs too early in a diet at the expense of fat cuts that would not endanger minimal fat levels. That's it for the implications for training on a hypocaloric diet. Now let's talk about the implications for training on a hypercaloric diet. The first implication is that because recovery abilities will be enhanced on a hypercaloric diet, some of the volumes that occur towards the end of mesocycles will be the highest of all phases. In fact, we can be even more assertive and say that because our ability to recover is elevated, it's a downright misappropriation of resources not to train harder during a hypercaloric dieting phase than any other phase, especially towards the end of a mesocycle. The second implication is that because your body's anabolic response to training is elevated, you can start your mesocycles with lower volumes than usual. This means that during a hypercaloric diet, you can both train easier than usual at the beginning of a mesocycle and harder than usual at the end of a mesocycle, which means that your adaptation curve is longer. An added bonus is that gain rates at any point along that curve are also higher than usual due to the added calories, so you can make all the more use of the longer accumulation phase. For example, if you usually start with 12 sets and end with 20 before deloading, when hypercaloric, you can start with 10 sets and end with 22 before deloading, perhaps extending your mesocycle from a 5-to-1 accumulation to deload paradigm to a 7-to-1 during this dieting phase. And the third implication is that even though your MVs are lower, you shouldn't take advantage of this and do a maintenance phase when you're hypercaloric. This is because when training at maintenance volumes, by definition, minimal workload is being done and no muscle is being built. And where will the excess calories go if no muscle is being built? That's right, to fat. If you try to run the maintenance phase when hypercaloric, you'll just gain fat and waste resources that could have been allocated to muscle growth. The only situation in which you should take advantage of this benefit is in specialization phases. This is because you'll be able to focus on more muscle groups at once due to lowered MVs, which is a really good strategy for advanced athletes who simply can't train their whole body at MAV volumes at once. To illustrate this, look at this graph. The three main muscle groups shown are legs, pushing muscles, and pulling muscles. Beginners are able to train their whole body at MRV volumes because the relative total body MRV allows it, while intermediates have to decide between putting one muscle group at MEV or two at MEV. Advanced, on the other hand, can only train one muscle group at MRV, one at MEV and one at MV to avoid impinging on the relative total body MRV. Keep in mind that this graph is only meant to illustrate the need for specialization phases. It's not meant to be taken literally. Okay, I guess now I've covered everything that this book had to offer. If you want to read it for yourself, I'll leave a link in the description. I hope that you found this video useful, and if you did, I'd really appreciate it if you left a like and commenting down below what kind of videos you would like to see from me more. And have an awesome day. Peace!